As the first shovel of dirt hit my wife's coffin, a man in a heavy black trench coat deliberately bumped into my shoulder. Before I could turn, I felt the unmistakable weight of a vibrating phone being slipped into my coat pocket. He didn't say a single word, just melted back into the sea of black umbrellas and mourning relatives. I stepped away from the grave, pulling the cheap plastic burner phone to my ear. "Don't react to anything I say," a sharp voice whispered. I recognized it instantly. It was Julian Vance, the eccentric billionaire antiquities dealer my wife had worked for. "Listen to me very carefully," Julian continued, his voice tight with an anxiety I'd never heard from him. "Your wife's fatal stroke was not a medical anomaly. I have the proof locked in my vault. You need to leave the cemetery right now and come straight to my estate. But whatever you do not get in the same car as your daughter or her husband. They are the reason she's in that box, and if they realize you're onto them, you won't live to see tomorrow morning." I stood completely frozen in the freezing rain, staring across the fresh grave at my own flesh and blood. If you think you know how dark family secrets can get, you might want to brace yourself. Stick around, because this story goes down a path you will never see coming. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, smash that like button, and if you aren't subscribed yet, hit it now. Trust me, the twist at the end of this one is going to leave you absolutely speechless. My name is Thomas Brody. I'm 65 years old, a retired railway engineer from Denver, Colorado. For 38 beautiful years, I was married to Sarah, a woman who brought color into every room she entered. Sarah was a restoration expert, spending the last 2 decades of her life restoring rare manuscripts for the Vance private collection. She was brilliant, sharp as a tack, and devoted to our family. We buried her on a Thursday in early November. The sky was the color of bruised iron. I stood there, shivering, not from the cold, but from a profound emptiness that seemed to hollow out my bones. Sarah had passed away just 12 days prior. The coroner ruled it a massive, sudden stroke triggered by a catastrophic spike in her blood pressure. We were shocked, but the doctors assured me that sometimes the human body just gives out without warning. I accepted it because a grieving mind desperately searches for simple answers. But looking across the cemetery, my daughter Emily and her husband David didn't look like people who had just lost a mother. Emily was 29, David 32. They had moved back into our guest room 8 months ago after their cryptocurrency startup spectacularly imploded, leaving them buried in debt. At the graveside, neither of them shed a single tear. David was aggressively typing on his phone, occasionally showing the screen to Emily, who would nod with a tense, calculated expression. They looked like business partners finalizing a corporate merger, not children burying a parent. When Julian Vance's warning echoed in my ear through that burner phone, a sudden, horrifying clarity washed over me. Julian was a legendary recluse. He hadn't attended a public event in a decade. For him to send an operative to a funeral and call me on a burner phone meant the earth was shifting beneath my feet. "I have to sign some paperwork at the funeral director's office," I lied to Emily, avoiding eye contact as we walked toward the parking lot. "I'll take my truck and meet you guys back at the house." Emily barely registered my words, just patted my arm absently. "Take your time, Dad. We'll get things ready at home." I climbed into my old Chevy Silverado and drove straight toward the Vance estate on the outskirts of the city. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the estate, my heart stopped. Parked on the shoulder of the road, arguing frantically with a security voice on the intercom, was David's silver Tesla. He had beaten me here. I immediately threw my truck into reverse and hid behind a thick row of pine trees. Through the branches, I watched my son-in-law pacing, violently gesturing at the security camera, screaming to be let in. The gates remained sealed shut. After 5 minutes of furious arguing, David kicked the tires of his car, got in, and sped off toward the city. Only then did I approach the gate. It opened for me immediately. Julian Vance was waiting for me in his cavernous, climate-controlled library. He looked pale, his hands trembling as he poured 2 glasses of scotch and pushed one toward me. "Did you see him out there?" Julian asked, his voice echoing in the vast room. "I saw David," I rasped, my throat dry. "Julian, tell me what the hell is going on. Why was my son-in-law trying to break into your estate?" Julian walked over to a heavy steel safe concealed behind a tapestry. He spun the dial, pulled out a thick leather ledger, and placed it on the mahogany table between us. "Sarah mailed this to me 2 weeks ago via private courier," Julian said softly. "The note attached said that if she died suddenly, I was to open it with you, and only you. She specifically instructed me to use my security team to ensure David and Emily didn't follow you here." I stared at the ledger. It was Sarah's personal journal, the one she supposedly lost a month ago. "Open it to the bookmarked page," Julian instructed. My hands shook violently as I flipped the pages. Inside, meticulously documented in my wife's elegant handwriting, was a trail of absolute horror. Sarah had discovered that a massive second mortgage had been taken out against our fully paid-off home. The electronic signatures were ours, but we had never signed them. The funds, nearly $400,000, had been routed through a labyrinth of shell companies straight into David and Emily's offshore accounts. But it got worse. So much worse. Sarah wrote that when she confronted Emily about missing mail and strange bank notices, Emily had panicked. The very next day, David insisted on taking over the morning routine, blending Sarah a special organic health smoothie every morning to help with her blood pressure. Sarah had noticed the smoothies tasted bitter. Suspicious, she secretly kept a sample of one in a vial and took it to a private lab across town. Tucked into the pages of the journal was the lab report. The smoothie was laced with a synthetic, untraceable chemical stimulant, a black market substance designed to drastically spike heart rate and blood pressure, virtually guaranteeing a massive cardiac event or stroke in older adults. Finally, there was a printed screenshot of a text thread Sarah had managed to pull from David's iPad when he left it unlocked. Emily, the bank is demanding a phone verification from Mom by Friday. We are out of time. David, relax. I doubled the drops in her drink today. Her pressure is already through the roof. A few more days and nature will take its course. Once she's out of the way, your dad is a pushover. We'll get him to sign the trust, and we're rich. I couldn't breathe. The library spun around me. My own daughter. The little girl I had taught to ride a bicycle, the girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, had actively participated in the slow, agonizing murder of her own mother for a payout. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal, suffocating grief that threatened to tear me apart. Julian grabbed my shoulder, anchoring me to reality. Thomas, listen to me. If you go to the police with just this, any good lawyer will claim Sarah was paranoid, that the texts were fabricated, and that the lab report is circumstantial, since the physical smoothies are gone. They will get away with it. Then what do? I choked out, tears finally spilling down my weathered face. Julian gestured to the corner of the room. From the shadows stepped a heavily muscled man with cold, assessing eyes. This is Marcus, Julian said. He's former FBI, now my head of security. We are going to wire your house, and you are going to go back there and play the part of a broken, clueless old man until they slip up and confess on tape. It was a suicide mission for my soul. I was being asked to sleep under the same roof as my wife's killers, to eat their food, to look into my daughter's eyes and pretend I didn't know there was blood on her hands. Marcus spent the next afternoon secretly installing microscopic, high-definition audio bugs in the kitchen, the living room, and the guest bedroom, while Emily and David were out handling funeral arrangements. The next 9 days were a psychological torture I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Emily and David played the roles of doting caretakers to perfection. They cooked for me, they cleaned. David started bringing me hot herbal tea every evening, claiming it would help me sleep through the grief. Every single night, I would smile, thank him, take the mug to my bedroom, and pour it silently down the bathroom sink. I barely slept, terrified that if I closed my eyes, they would find another way to finish the job. On the 7th day, Emily sat next to me on the couch, rubbing my back as I faked a crying fit over Sarah's photo. "Dad," she whispered, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I know this is hard, but David and I were talking. You shouldn't have to worry about the house or the finances right now. We had our lawyer draw up a trust document. It just transfers the estate management to us, so you can focus on healing." "I'll look at it," I mumbled, playing the exhausted victim. "Maybe next week." "Of course, Dad. Take your time," she smiled. But her eyes were dead. The breakthrough came on the 9th night. I told them I was feeling incredibly weak, took a fake sleeping pill in front of them, and retreated to my room at 8 p.m. Downstairs, Marcus was monitoring the feeds from a van parked 3 blocks away. At 11:30 p.m., the kitchen microphone picked up a hushed argument. "He's dragging his feet," David hissed. "The second mortgage payment defaults in 3 weeks. If he doesn't sign that trust document tomorrow, the bank takes the house and we get nothing." "Just give him the tea," Emily snapped back, her voice utterly devoid of humanity. "I have been, but I'm using a lower dose of the drops. If he drops dead of a stroke exactly 2 weeks after Mom, the cops will absolutely order a toxicology screening, and we are screwed." "Then we force his hand," Emily argued. "I can't take living in this house anymore. I still see Mom's face when she collapsed in the hallway. She looked right at me, David. She knew." "She was going to send us to federal prison, Em," David replied, his tone chillingly calm. "She found the bank statements. We had no choice. We gave her the drops, she stroked out, and it's done. Nobody suspects a thing. Just get your old man to sign the papers tomorrow morning, and we are free." In his van down the street, Marcus hit save. We had them. The next morning, the trap was set. Emily and David had arranged for a notary, a slimy friend of David's, to come to the house at 10 a.m. They sat me down at the head of the dining room table. The trust document, essentially signing away everything I owned to them, was placed in front of me, along with a heavy black pen.
"Just sign on the sticky notes, Dad," Emily said, resting her hand on my shoulder. "It's for the best." I looked at the document. Then I looked at David, who was smirking slightly. Finally, I looked at my daughter. "Before I sign this," I said, my voice eerily steady, "I want to share something Sarah left for us." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and connected it to the Bluetooth speaker sitting on the kitchen counter. I hit play. The audio of their kitchen conversation from the night before blasted through the house in crystal clear definition. She was going to send us to federal prison. We gave her the drops, she stroked out, and it's done. The silence that followed was suffocating. The fake notary slowly backed away from the table. David's smug expression dissolved into pure, white-hot panic. Emily's jaw dropped, her face draining of all blood as she stumbled backward, knocking her chair over. "Dad," Emily stammered, her hands shaking.
"Dad, I can explain. That was out of context." "Sit down," I roared, slamming my fists onto the table with a force that rattled the windows. I didn't recognize my own voice. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. "You murdered the woman who gave you life. For money. You sat in her house, you smiled in her face, and you poisoned her." David lunged toward the back door. He didn't make it 3 steps. The glass of the patio door shattered inward as Marcus and a heavily armed SWAT team breached the house from both the front and the back simultaneously. Red laser sights painted David's chest as he was slammed face first into the hardwood floor. Emily dropped to her knees, screaming hysterically as cold steel handcuffs were ratcheted onto her wrists. I sat completely still at the head of the table, watching the police drag my only child out the front door in chains. I felt no triumph, only the crushing, terrible weight of justice.
It has been over a year since that morning. The trial was brief. Faced with the wiretap audio, the ledger, and the lab report Julian's team provided, their defense crumbled. David was sentenced to life in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Emily pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. She was sentenced to 45 years. She wrote me a letter from prison last month. I returned it, unopened. Julian Vance and I have become unlikely companions. We meet for scotch on the anniversary of Sarah's death, sharing quiet stories about the brilliant woman who outsmarted her own murderers from beyond the grave. With Julian's help, I sold the house, recovered the stolen equity, and used every single penny to establish the Sarah Brody Foundation. We provide free legal counsel and private investigative services to elderly individuals who suspect they are being financially abused by their relatives. So far, we've put 6 abusers behind bars.
Every night before I go to bed, I look at a photo of Sarah on my nightstand. They thought they could silence her. They thought she was just a fragile old woman they could sweep under the rug. But they underestimated her brilliance, and they underestimated my love for her. She fought for me until her last breath, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure her fight wasn't in vain. If this story hit home for you, do me a favor and hit that like button. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. How would you have handled this if it was your family? Don't forget to subscribe for more crazy true stories, and I'll see you all in the next video. Stay safe out there.